Hello. We have a quite interesting, vibrant, troubling, deeply troubling text to look at today. Obviously, it's violent, it's disgusting. We are grappling with the biblical text at its most intense here. There's a bunch of different issues to bring up. The intervening chapters between 2 Kings 6 verses 8 through 23, which we focused on last time, and then the death of Jezebel in 2 Kings 9 verses 30 through 37. There's a lot of really interesting stuff in between. If you didn't happen to read the story that follows after the story of Elisha and the fiery chariots, starting with 2 Kings chapter 6 verse 24 and going on through chapter 7, it's just a fascinating story, troubling and strange, also following on the heels of the declaration that Aram never came into the land anymore. I should have said in my conversation, the Gudude, those bands, the bands might not refer to armies, but all the same, it still is a striking juxtaposition. These two stories, but also the story of the leprous men who end up kind of finding all this enormous feast. So the feasting imagery and the starvation imagery in the end of chapter 6 and into chapter 7 contrasts in some way with the feasting imagery in chapter 6 verses 8 through 23. So there's some really interesting stuff there to work through, stuff about food and money and outsiders and the possibility of God's intervention. So all that stuff is, I think, interesting and important. And then there's the resumption of the story of the Shunammite woman. So the woman who we translated the text in chapter 4, she comes back here in chapter 8, verses 1 through 6. And just take a note in 2 Kings 8, 1 through 6. Just read that story really quickly. It almost seems like a throwaway story, but I think it's really important, especially in light of what if we focused just on the story of Jezebel here, we might get the sense that Elisha and Elijah are completely misogynistic or something, which of course there's deep misogyny in the story of Jezebel and the kind of joy that's taken in her dismemberment in chapter 9. But in chapter 8 we get this kind of sweet story of Elisha going out of his way to take care and just help this woman with what would have been a complete economic disaster for her otherwise. In the time of COVID-19, I look at this story, 2 Kings 8 verses 1 through 6, and I just think, oh my goodness, this is like a policy we need today. This idea that in a time of economic disaster and famine or pandemic, whatever have you, that people who flee and who don't have the ability to pay, is it possible for us to restore them, their property, their businesses, their what they've lost in the time of the pandemic, the famine? We can think of this in terms of climate change as well, thinking about restoring people to life, not just physically the son being restored to life, but this woman being restored to life out of death, and that her economic potential, that her engagement with the possibility for having a life, to create a life for herself, is essential for her life. So in any event, all to say, that's there. Then we have this story that follows with verse 7 of chapter 8, all the way to verse 15, about the death of King Ben-Hadad. And there's several Ben-Hadads, and there's several Hazaels in the history of Aram. So that's why it's confusing sometimes which one we're looking at. And often there were Hazaels who had Ben-Hadads who then had Hazaels, or they succeeded one another, and so there's a confusing history there. But in any event, it's amazing here that Elisha, it takes part of the kind of healing of Ben-Hadad, and Elisha also is so sad because this guy's going to kill lots of Israelites, but he's part of healing him and anointing and transitioning the leadership from Hazael. So it's just so fascinating. That Hazael is going to be so terrible to the Israelites, but yet this is what has to happen. We get a sense that there's something at play more than just kind of Yahweh's mercy and sovereignty, but there's something actually with kind of the history of the world where there is some agency, or I don't know. It's a fascinating story. So then, by the way, we have kind of some foreshadowing here with the discussions of dogs and things like that. And then in chapter 9, we move into the story of Jehu. This is really important because it has to do with Jezebel. So read chapter 9 for some of the backstory too. The prophecy is mentioned several times from 1 Kings 17. That is brought back up again here. Also, 1 Kings 21. That story of Naboth's vineyard comes up here again, although it's different. Did you notice that in chapter 9, Naboth's vineyard is different than it is in 1 Kings 21? That is, there might be a story out there that it takes several different forms or something, and we've got two of those forms here. So, and then also we can say that the figure of Jezebel there in this story, there's clear misogyny. That is, Jezebel is kind of named as the worst person in the history of Israel, and there's a joy that's taken in her pain and suffering, and in the fact that she's going to be eviscerated from the earth. This is often a fantasy of misogynistic men, that there's going to be kind of an evaporation of women, or that women can be done away with, eaten by the dogs, and kind of this disgusting desire to eradicate any memory of this person or physical existence of this person. So that's in view here, but also the story of Jehu is itself complex, that he is someone who is named by God and by Elijah and now Elisha as someone who is kind of picked to succeed this house of Omri, which Ahab is the last one. But then also Jehu himself is troubling, that he is over the top and tries to, in chapter 10, if you look forward to chapter 10, he kills all of the worshippers of Baal in this kind of scheme. It's a trick, this kind of really jaw-dropping trick to try to kill all these people, kind of like Elijah did, and kind of like Elijah, it doesn't seem to work in that way. So in verse 28 of chapter 10, Jehu wiped out Baal from Israel, but Jehu didn't turn aside from the sins of Jeroboam. And then in chapter 10, verse 32, in those days the Lord began to trim off the parts of Israel. So that is, this is the downward slide, which Jehu's work doesn't stop. There's a really strange story too with Jehonadab, son of Rechab, and the Rechabites in chapter 10. That's a strange sect also mentioned in the book of Jeremiah. So anyway, all to say, Jehu himself is a fascinating character, and the deep anger that's felt in the story against Jezebel is in part because Jezebel did, according to the story, participated in the murder of Israelite prophets, who were Yahwists. But also, the way that this death is encountered is way over the top. It's kind of like one of these movies that's ultra violent, like a Quentin Tarantino movie or something that's like almost reveling in the violence in a way that makes me at least really uncomfortable. So I'm sorry to have assigned a very uncomfortable text for an uncomfortable week. And, in light of COVID, if you just need to skip this text, I totally understand. That said, though, we would expect Jezebel to be characterized here in this text in the worst ways, just as wholly repellent and disgusting and etc. But that's not what we find. So notice that Jezebel is given a hero's portrait here, and I almost don't know what to do with the juxtaposition between the care with which Jezebel is characterized in her story, and then the overwhelming anger with which she is demolished in the story as well. This may be also a fixture of misogyny. That is to say, men who are fixated on women as both all powerful and all evil. There's a lot to work through here in the comments. I've got my own take on Jezebel, which I'm sure will come out in the forums, but I don't want to say too much. I don't want to. I want us to wrestle together with the way that this text portrays it. Okay, so let's go ahead and turn to the Hebrew then. So 2 Kings chapter 9 verse 30. We're going to read through verse 37, and we'll start here. Okay, so here we go with the Hebrew. Vayavo, Yehu, Yizra'elah. And we'll stop here because that's the Athnach. And back over here, Vayavo, Vayetol form. Here's Bo, a middle week. So even though it's in the call, Vayetol here, looking like a call imperfect, right? We don't have a hirek, a short I-class vowel underneath our performative, which you'd expect from the call. Remember, calls have hireks, PLs have schwas, hiffles have pataks, short A-class vowels. Typically for a strong root, right? For a weak root, these middle weak roots in the call, they take this long A-class vowel. Okay. And then next is Yehu. Try to figure out what that name means. You might be surprised. It's an interesting one. And then Jezreel-lah. Jezreel words, towards Jezreel. And remember, we've come across Jezreel several times, a really important area in the north of Israel, a very verdant valley. And then Isabel, or Jezebel, Shama'ah, Vatase Bapuch Eneha, Vatetev Et Rosha. I'll stop there for the Zakev Katon. So, and Jezebel heard, this is the third feminine singular, call perfect, right? Here's our ending. Vatase. This is she put or set. This is from seem, a middle weak verb. This is the tav here is not second person. We expect that sometimes, but this is a feminine subject, Jezebel. So this is the third feminine singular performative here with that long A-class vowel, just like Bo, that long A-class vowel underneath our performative for call middle weeks. And then Bapuch with, she set with Puch. This is eyeshadow. And so this is, by the way, one of the names of Job's daughters at the end of Job is Karen Hapuch. Karen is a horn, so a horn of this puch stuff, which is this eyeshadow horn, or a makeup container is what Job's daughter's name is. It's meant to be lavish, like extravagant, extraordinarily expensive, and so on. And so to have this stuff was amazing. So Jezebel is being characterized here, not just as being rich, although she is. She's a queen. She's supposed to be rich, right? But it's something more than that, I think, here. Eneha, her eyes. So she set with eyeshadow, her eyes, or some sort of makeup, her eyes. This is our hiffle, 5 consecutive, third feminine singular. Here's our prefix for third feminine singular form, and then yatav, a true first yod root. And so this is the hiffle, so it's she made good or made beautiful. And then et rosha, her head. Rosh, like Bereshit in the beginning or at the top. And then va tashkef, and she looked out. This is also a hiffle. Here we have the first yods mess with your vowels that you get under the performative. Here we have a true hiffle vowel underneath our performative here, and she looked. This is a really interesting verb. Take a look at this one for somebody take a look at this one and report back. And then ba'ad ha chalon. Now this is really important. First of all, it's not really exactly it's kind of a window, but they didn't have like windows with nice glass and stuff like that in the ancient world. So this is a lattice frame kind of thing. But also a woman gazing behind a lattice window. This is a very common motif in ancient Near Eastern imagery and in poetry, and this is a part of the Song of Songs. This is found elsewhere in the Bible a couple of times. This is Sisera's mother looking, kind of gazing out the window in the book of Judges. This is a really important cultural phenomenon, the woman looking behind the window, the woman looking through the window. There's artwork from this from the ancient world. I'm not going to tell you exactly what it means, but this might be a really good thing for someone to jump into in terms of context. What does this mean? This kind of woman gazing out the window. It is full of cultural resonance, and it's a sophisticated image. And so she's putting on all this makeup, making her head beautiful, which could be a reference to her makeup, her kind of appearance, her face. It could be a reference to jewelry. It could be a reference to her crown, or other jewelry that she's going to put on her head. But the effect is important here. What is she doing, do you think, and why? And why is she being characterized this way? There's different ways to read it, I know. But in any event, so to verse 31. V'yehu, and remember the way that syntax works. So this is now Jehu, and then Jehu, right? So this is a disjunctive here because we have the subject coming first. And Jehu, ba sha'ar. And I'll stop there for the Athnach. Ba, this is the verb bo again, called perfect third masculine singular form here. And then ba sha'ar, at the gate, and Jehu entered at the gate. And this part of a kind of typical Israelite structure, especially for someone who had means. Va tomer ha shalom. And then here's our Zakev Katon, so I'll stop there. And she said, so notice who takes the kind of advantage of the situation, or who takes the lead here, right? Notice the characterization here. Ha shalom, this is a question piece. Is it peace? Now that phrase, is it peace, has already happened in the story a couple times in chapter 9. So note that too. But also it's occurred other places. Is it peace? And not just peace like, do you not want to hurt, but is this a good thing? Are you doing this for good or for harm? And then Zimri, horeg Adonav. So is it peace, Zimri? Now, his name is not Zimri. She knows that his name is not Zimri. I'm guessing. He's already probably been very famous, given the death of Joram. So she's well aware of who this guy is, but she calls him Zimri nonetheless. There's a couple of things I think this could mean, and probably it's many layered. But just try to dig into a little bit of this. And then Horeg, this is a participial form, right? Holam, and then Sere. Horeg, murderer. Now, take a look at where else this word occurs. It occurs in two very famous places, and also lots of courthouse walls in the United States. And then Adonav, his lord. Like basically your lord in a way. Is it peace, Zimri, the murderer of his master? So this is characterizing this guy Jehu in a certain way, in several ways, all at once. So try to dig into a little bit of that, because I think that's really important. And then Vayesa Panav, and he lifted up. This is from Nasa. This looks like a Nifal triangle, and it should be, right? Except this is first noon verbs can look like this in the call. This is just a typical call, vayak tol, hirek vowel underneath here. And then we've got this noon that is curling up, and this is the noon from the actual root that's curling up into the scene. So this is just nasa. Sorry, this is a call perfect. Call vav consecutive, looking like an imperfect here. But so, and he lifted up, and then panav, his face, el ha chalon. He lifted up his face to the window, or this, the lattice work. So Jehu looks up. He's like, she's caught him by surprise, right? Vayomer, and he says, now it's his turn to try to retort, right? Mi iti, me, and he says, who is with me? Remember, et with a hirek underneath means with. If it had a hold'em over here, it'd be an object. So with, and then me, e. That's the object suffix, first person. Who is with me? Who? And then here's the athnach. Vayash kifu elav. And they looked out. This is that same verb that we saw with Jezebel, but it's plural this time, and it's masculine plural, and it's a hifel. So they looked out elav, to him, shenayim, two, sholosha, three. 2, 3. This is, I guess the narrator may be a bit confused here, 2 or 3. There's no word or here. That would be a vav. The word in can function that way too, but we don't have that. We just have 2, 3, and then sarisim. Saris is like an important official. It can also mean eunuch. It doesn't necessarily mean someone biologically made into a eunuch, but it can mean that. So in any event, it's a bit of a parsing issue sometimes about what this exactly means. But there's 2 or 3 of these officials, these saris, who are looking out the window. Vayomer, and I'm guessing he said, he's asking who's on my side, right? Who wants to participate in the coup? Because I'll spare you, right? He's trying to find allies. So Vayomer, simtuhu, and this is here an imperative. You'd assume that this would have to be a schwa, but 2 schwas in a row. You don't start the first with the schwa. You can't start a word with 2 schwas in a row. That's the little vocal rule from Hebrew. And so this always turns into a hirek. This is the rule of schwa here. So in any event, so shim, tu, hu, this is the u meaning plural. When you add the object suffix to it, hu, that will smush your shurek, if you have a plural verb, here into a kibbutz. So shin tu, that's throw down or drop, let go, and then hu, him, who means him, which is interesting. Maybe Jehu does say this and has a meaning for this, but also in the kareh, what's read aloud, it's shim tu ha. And here you have the full shurek here. So this is drop, let drop or throw down, and then ha, her, the third feminine singular object suffix. So really interesting, right? I mean, this Ketif Kareh issue happens. Maybe it's possible that there's some sort of meaning behind that. But then vayish matuha, and they threw her down. So this is just they obeyed. And then we start to get to the gory part, the gross part. If you don't have a stomach for violence, or if misogynistic violence is in some way triggering, you can just cut out here and just trust me that things don't go well for Jezebel, that there is a kind of fascination with her body at this point in time, which these kind of violent revenge fantasies, often misogynistic revenge fantasies, do kind of involve kind of overly pleasurable, or at least there seems to be this kind of gross, violent, horror-driven pleasure in the details of the dismemberment. So, anyway, here we go. Those of you who are still following. So, vayiz, and this is actually an important verb. We've come across it already in the Elisha cycle. So take a look at what this one is. But vayiz, this is just a Zion here, but this comes from nazah. And then mi dama, from, this is min, from, dam, blood, and her. This is the, don't forget her, mapik in the hay. So from the blood of her, from her blood. And it's sprinkled, back up here, this nazah, this root, it's sprinkle or splatter, and it's sprinkled from her blood, el ha-kir, to the wall. Now, what would this mean? Blood spattering on a wall? I mean, it kind of sounds like a horror movie. But at the same time, what does blood spattering do in ancient Israel? And what does blood spattering on some sort of stone object do in ancient Israel, right? Okay, so va'el ha-susim, and to the horses, vayir masena. And they trampled. This is, it's actually, and it trampled. That is kind of collectively treating the horses. And he trampled, really, or it trampled. That is the group of horses. That happens in some Hebrew sometimes where you have a group treated with one verb, like the Israelites are all treated sometimes with one verb, etc. And then, this is bit confusing here, but this is probably her. So there's the noon there is probably some sort of a paragogic noon, a noon that just gets added, and then the that's her. So in any event, and they trampled her. The horses, they got kind of spooked, it seems, by the spattering of the blood and by the probably the sound of her dropping. So gross, right? But also I think there's some significance in the way that that's depicted. But in any event, vayavo, vayochel, vayisht, and I'll stop there because it's the athnach, right? So, and he went in, he entered. This has been a verb that's occurred several times. Maybe it's just a coincidence, but maybe there's something there. And he ate and he drank, like banqueted. We read just about some eating and drinking and banqueting in chapter 6, right? And then we saw a bunch of eating stuff in chapter 7. There's eating stuff kind of replete throughout the Elisha cycle. So this is yet again a kind of food is playing a role here in the ceremonial symbolic function of banqueting. Vayomer Pikduna, this is from Pakad, which is actually in the Ten Commandments, this visiting the sins of the parents on the children. This kind of visiting, appointing, punish, a very interesting word. Often like kind of sometimes it's like letting a consequence happen. Sometimes it's actually enforcing a rule or something. Sometimes it's actually literally showing up just to take a visit, just to visit someone. Sometimes it's taking account of the amount of, like numbering. This is used in kind of assessing how much you have of something. So it's got a wide range of possibilities. But what he's saying is visit, appoint, do something, number, account for, et ha-arura. Account for the cursed one. This is a call passive participle. So remember call active participles? Arur is actually the form of the call passive participle. We learned that way back when, but this is a feminine singular with the ending. This is a strange form, odd form, but we just treat it like an adjective for now, like the one, like a substantive adjective, the one who is accursed. And then hazeh, this, accursed one. Kivruha. So this was a imperative, and we come back here to another imperative here, and bury. The same thing with the rule of schwa here, where it would have been 2 schwas in a row for the imperative, but you can't start a word with 2 schwas in a row. So here we have the hirek that replaces that. It's the rule of schwa, and the u plural, so bury, her. Ki bat melech he. For a daughter of a king is she. So he's got at least some common courtesy for other royals, right, now that he's about to become a royal. So there's probably some irony there. And then in verse 35, Vayelchu, and he went. Notice this is a disjunctive accent, and it's the they actually. And they went, le kovra, that's a comment chatuf there. And they went to, this is the lamed, it's the preposition for, or 2 or 4, and it's this is an infinitive here, infinitive construct. So to bury her, and I say it's kov in part because I know that infinitive constructs are going to work like that here, but lokovra, to bury her, velo matza'u ba ki'im ha Gulgolat ha raglayim. Okay, so and they went to bury her, and not did they find. This is just a call perfect, and they did not find ba in her or with her. Ki'im, and remember ki'im together is a idiom which means except, so they did not find her except the Gulgolat. You know this from Golgotha, the place of the skull. This is the word, ancient Hebrew word for skull. And the feet. And then kapot ha yadayim. the palms of her hands, of the hands. Again, gross, disgusting. But there's a symbolic meaning probably to some of these parts that are left, right? Skull, feet, hands, and so on. If you're so inclined, there might be something interesting there to think about. Why would the narrator point this out, right? And then Vayashuvu, Vayagidu lo. I'll stop there and say, and when they returned, this is Yashuv. I've got a long A-class vowel under my performative here, under my prefix. And so that's suggesting to me that this is a middle week here, Shuv. Let's call middle week. And they came back. Remember, they didn't find enough to bury, and they came back, and they reported to him, and this is from Nagad, a Hiffle form. Here's our Hiffle prefix here, our Yod prefix, and then the Hiffle vowel underneath the performative. And this is an infixed here at Yod because it's a Hiffle. So it's Gimel and then Dalet, and then the Nun, that's the first letter of our root, is found in the middle of that Gimel in the Dagesh. And they reported to him, Vayomer Davar Adonai Hu, and they reported to him, and he said, the word of the Lord is this. The verbless clause, this is the word of the Lord. Asher diber bayad avado Eliyahu ha tishbi lemor. And I'll stop there because the Athnak, which he spoke, the Lord, that is, which the Lord spoke, Yahweh spoke, by the hand or the power of God's servant, Elijah, the Tishbite. So, referencing all the way back to 1 Kings 21. Lemor, saying, and then, but Chelek, Yisrael, sounds like Yisrael, but yeah, Yisrael. It's got two gutturals there in a row, which is a little tricky to say. So in the chelek, or the portion, or the territory, the subdivision, kind of what God apportions to the different tribes and so on, the portion of Jezreel, Yochlu ha-kelabim et basar Izabel. So this is, they will eat, and then here's our subject, the dogs will eat the flesh of Jezebel. So if you go back and look at 1 Kings 21, there is a very negative prophecy of Ahab. I remember Ahab repents, and Jezebel apparently doesn't. Ahab also dies in battle, but in any event, this is Jezebel is kind of gets the worst of it in some ways, although dogs are involved in Ahab's death as well. So Vahaya, and then Vahayata, this is our kare here, and it will be. So the question is the gender of the word corpse here, Naval or Navalat, the corpse of Jezebel. So Vahayat, Nivlat, Yisavel, Domen, Al Panei Ha Sadeh, B'Chelek Yisrael. So, and it was the corpse of Jezebel, and I'll say the corpse, even though there's no ha in the front of here, because this is in construct. That's why you have the tav here. It should be a he for the feminine noun. Nivlat, the corpse of Jezebel. K, like, and then domen, dung, fertilizer. Alpaneh, on the face of Hasada, the field, in the portion of Jezreel. Asher lo yomru zot Isabel, which, that is, it will not be said, they will not say, or it will not be said, this is Jezebel. The purpose here is the same thing as the end of Deuteronomy for Moses, that there can't be a burial site, or else it could be, that could become a rallying place for people who want to remember that person as a hero. So there's the end of the story. So there's nothing left of Jezebel, not just because of the dogs and not just because of the prophecy, but also because the king didn't, the new king didn't want there to be anything left for people to remember Jezebel. Now, of course, strangely, this story is in fact something left of Jezebel to make everyone remember her in perpetuity. And this story does not portray her as a particularly evil person. It portrays her as if you just took this story alone out of context, you would not get the sense that she was the most evil person to live. Instead, you might get the sense that she was a really intelligent, witty, proud, and not proud in a terrible sense, but brave, courageous, even seductive, alluring person. Someone who took care of themselves to the very end and bravely met what they knew would be certain doom by mocking the person who was going to do it, and also severely undercutting their ability to be a justifiable king after this. She does it all. And in fact, there's this great effort by the men in the story to dismember her, do away with her, have the dogs eat her so there's nothing left. And yet we're talking about her right now. She, in some way, at least in this part of the story, wins. Now, I don't want to be like a Jezebel is amazing kind of person, particularly because if you just read the stories and take them at face level, she does awful things and is a murderous queen, right? I think it's important for us to not go all, yay Jezebel, when in fact she in the story is doing terrible things. Now, the historical Jezebel who's behind this, we don't have a lot of access to that or details about that. It's very possible that in all these stories that she's overwrought, overtold, and that is part of a really misogynistic way of thinking about power that goes all the way back to Asa and Queen Makkah, the Queen Mother Makkah that we saw in 1 Kings 14. So there's a chance that this is part of a larger program, and that we might have reason to reread Jezebel. I'd also want to point out that in the history of the use of Jezebel, that it has been used. You just Google Jezebel. Just look at the Wikipedia page and see how it's been used. This could be an interesting context part. If you want to look at this in terms of your context for the forum posting, feel free to post it on the context or in the interpretation section. Something about the use of Jezebel has been used particularly in American history as a way of othering and demeaning and making people terrified, or at least white people terrified of the sexuality of especially African American women. So just to point that out, that Jezebel's been used in particularly disturbing ways in American history. And when you preach on Jezebel, just be aware of that. Know that even sometimes take it upon yourself to kind of disabuse people of some of these legacies of interpretation. And Jezebel has nothing to do with African American women, and has nothing to do with like being tempting Israelite men or something. This is not who she is. Even in the story. So all to say, there's a lot of things to deal with here. Feel free to deal with any of it in the comments. If you need to kind of process this and maybe just skip this week, feel free, based on the heavy content of it. But we'll be back here to talk about. We're going to skip a long time here. We're going to skip to 2 Kings 17. Skim between 2 Kings 10 and 17 for next week. There's a lot of like kind of internal deliberations with the northern kingdom, and King Pool of Assyria begins to show up. So there's a lot happening, but we've got I'll try to sum some of that up next week. All right, see you all next Monday.